The general was making a routine visit to wounded soldiers when he saw her. Time stopped. His aide whispered, "Sir, is everything all right?" But the general couldn't move, couldn't speak, because the woman in scrubs standing before him was supposed to be dead. Welcome to the Lost Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden identity, silent sacrifice, and unexpected recognition, tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this video today? And if you believe real heroes walk among us unnoticed, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Room 34 never stayed empty long. The cardiac wing of St. Mary's Hospital saw a steady stream of patients, and Nurse Margaret Chen had worked these halls for 15 years. Same navy blue scrubs, same quiet efficiency, same gentle smile that put families at ease during their darkest hours. She arrived every morning at 5:45 a.m., 30 minutes before her shift. Not because she had to, but because preparation mattered. Her locker was sparse, a photo of an elderly woman, a thermos that had seen better days, and a small wrapped package she never opened but always checked was still there. Margaret moved through her rounds with precision that impressed even veteran doctors. When a patient coded, she was there before the alarm stopped ringing. When families needed comfort, she found the right words. When chaos erupted, she brought calm. The other nurses called her Margaret the Machine, not mockingly, but with respect. She never panicked, never made mistakes, never lost her composure. But she also never talked about herself, never joined after-work gatherings, never shared stories about her life before St. Mary's. Rodriguez, the head of cardiology, once asked her where she'd trained before coming to St. Mary's. Margaret had simply replied, "Different places, different circumstances." That was 15 years ago. He'd never asked again. Tuesday morning started like any other. Margaret was checking medication charts when the elevator doors opened, with unusual activity. Not the familiar sound of gurneys and worried families, but something else. Measured footsteps, multiple voices, speaking in clipped, professional tones. Hospital administrator Miss Walsh appeared at the nurses' station, visibly nervous. "Margaret, we have some VIP visitors today. Military personnel visiting our wounded veterans in the East Wing. Please ensure everything is perfect." Margaret nodded without looking up from her chart. Military visits weren't uncommon at St. Mary's. They thanked veterans, took photos, made speeches. Standard procedure. But as the group approached her station, something felt different. The footsteps were too synchronized. The voices carried authority that reached beyond hospital walls. And when Margaret finally looked up, the clipboard slipped from her hands. 4 men in dress uniforms stood before her. The man in the center wore stars that caught the fluorescent light. General Harrison Mitchell, according to his nameplate. But Margaret didn't need to read it. She knew that face. The general stopped mid-sentence in his conversation with Mrs. Walsh. His eyes locked on Margaret with an expression that shifted from casual observation to confusion, then to something approaching shock. "Sir?" his aide prompted quietly. "Sir, is everything all right?" General Mitchell didn't answer. He stared at the woman in scrubs, as if seeing a ghost. Margaret remained frozen behind the counter, her face betraying nothing, but her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the station. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes. Miss Russ looked between them, confused. The other officers exchanged glances. Patients and visitors in the hallway began to notice the strange stillness. Finally, the general stepped forward. His voice was barely a whisper. "Captain Sarah Mitchell." Margaret's composure cracked for just an instant. A flash of something, recognition, fear, resignation, crossed her features before the professional mask returned. "I think you have me confused with someone else, General." But her voice carried an accent that hadn't been there moments before. Subtle, but unmistakable to someone who knew how to listen. "Dettelechern," Mitchell turned to his aide. "Clear the area. Official business." His tone left no room for argument. Mrs. Walsh started to protest, but one look from the general silenced her. The hospital staff dispersed, leaving only the military personnel and the nurse who might not be who she claimed to be. "Captain Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell," the general said again, this time with certainty. "Army Medical Corps, 82nd Airborne Division. Served in Afghanistan, 2000. Margaret, or Sarah, remained silent, her eyes fixed on something beyond the general's shoulder, as if she was seeing a different place, a different time. You were listed as KIA after the bombing in Kandahar, the general continued. Your unit was overrun. No survivors. I believed you were gone. Still no response from the woman in scrubs. One of the younger officers stepped forward. Sir, are you saying this nurse is actually a deceased military officer? General Mitchell never took his eyes off Margaret. Captain Mitchell was the finest combat medic I ever served with. She saved more lives in 4 years than most doctors save in their entire careers. Under fire, under impossible conditions, she never lost a patient. Never. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the fallen clipboard. That person doesn't exist anymore, she said quietly. She died in that bombing, just like the records say. What happened that day? The general asked, his voice softer now. We searched for survivors. The entire compound was destroyed. Margaret looked around the empty nurses' station, checking that no one else was listening. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years of silence. I was in the medical tent when the mortar started falling. 3 wounded soldiers were on my table, 2 critical to move, 2 injured to survive transport. When I heard the evacuation order, I had to choose. She paused, remembering. I sent my staff ahead, told them I'd follow with the wounded. But I knew those boys wouldn't make it if I left them. So I stayed. The general closed his eyes. The compound was overrun 30 minutes later. I hid them in a supply bunker underneath the medical facility, kept them alive for 6 days, while enemy forces controlled the base above us. No supplies, no communication, no hope of rescue. How did you survive? Margaret's laugh was bitter. Local resistance found us on the 7th day. 3 dying American soldiers and 1 army medic who refused to abandon them. They smuggled us out through underground tunnels. But she gestured at herself. Sarah Mitchell couldn't go home. Too many people had seen her die. Too many official reports had been filed. So Sarah Mitchell stayed buried in Afghanistan. And Margaret Chen came to America to heal people the only way she knew how. The general's aide had been typing frantically on a tablet. Throughout Margaret's story, he looked up with wide eyes. Sir, I'm showing classified files being unsealed in real time. Operation Lazarus. Authorization level, this goes all the way to the Pentagon. General Mitchell ignored him, focused entirely on Margaret. The 3 soldiers you saved. Do you know what happened to them? Margaret shook her head. I was told they recovered, but I never learned their names. Operational security. Sergeant James Rodriguez, Corporal Michael Thompson, and Private First Class David Kim. The general's voice was steady, but emotion flickered in his eyes. Rodriguez became a doctor. Thompson teaches high school. Kim runs a non-profit for wounded veterans. Margaret blinked hard, fighting back tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in 15 years. They never forgot their angel, the general continued. The medic who stayed behind to save them. They've spent years trying to find any trace of Captain Sarah Mitchell, wanting to thank the woman who gave up her life so they could live theirs. They don't need to thank me, Margaret whispered. I was doing my job. No, the general said firmly. You were doing what heroes do. You sacrificed everything. Your name, your identity, your recognition, so others could live. The general reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a medal, the Distinguished Service Cross. This was approved in 2008, he said, for extraordinary heroism in Afghanistan. But we couldn't award it to a dead soldier. Until now. Margaret stared at the medal, her professional composure finally cracking completely. Tears she'd held back for over a decade began to fall. I don't need recognition, she managed. I have my patients here. I have my purpose, and you'll keep them, the general assured her. But Sarah Mitchell deserves to be remembered. The men you saved deserve to thank you, and the world deserves to know that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear scrubs. 2 hours later, St. Mary's Hospital received 3 unexpected visitors. Dr. James Rodriguez, teacher Michael Thompson, and veterans advocate David Kim arrived within minutes of each other, none knowing the others were coming. They found Margaret in the break room, still in her scrubs, still processing the morning's revelation. When they saw her, all 3 men stood at attention, not the military attention they'd learned as soldiers, but the deeper respect of men greeting the person who gave them a second chance at life. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've been looking for you for 15 years. Margaret looked at the three men, older now, bearing the marks of lives well lived, and finally allowed herself to smile the way she hadn't since before that day in Afghanistan. "You don't need to thank me," she said, echoing her words from earlier. Thompson stepped forward. "Maybe not, but we needed to find you, to tell you that every life we've touched, every person we've helped, every day we've lived, it all started because you refused to leave us behind." Kim nodded. "You didn't just save our lives that day. You saved every life we've been able to save since." Margaret Chen continued working at St. Mary's Hospital. Her patients still called her their angel, but now some of them knew why. The staff treated her with the same respect as always, but with a deeper understanding of the hands that cared for them. General Mitchell arranged for the hospital to receive increased funding for their veterans' war, not as payment but as recognition that sometimes the most important battles are fought in places far from the headlines. The three men Margaret saved remained in contact, forming an unlikely family bound by one woman's refusal to abandon hope. They established a scholarship in her name, not Sarah Mitchell's, not Margaret Chen's, but simply the Angel Scholarship for students entering combat medicine. Margaret kept the Distinguished Service Cross in her locker, next to the photo of her elderly mother and the thermos she'd carried for 15 years. But she added something new, a picture of herself with Rodriguez, Thompson, and Kim, taken on the day they were finally able to say thank you. She never spoke publicly about her service, never gave interviews or wrote memoirs, but every morning at 5:45 a.m., she arrived at St. Mary's Hospital and continued doing what she'd always done, saving lives one patient at a time. Because real heroes don't need recognition, they just need purpose. Some people save lives once and spend the rest of their days telling the story. Others save lives every day and never speak of it at all. Captain Sarah Mitchell died in Afghanistan so that 3 soldiers could live. Margaret Chen was born from that sacrifice to heal countless others. The greatest heroes aren't always the ones with medals on their wall. Sometimes they're the ones with stethoscopes around their necks, working night shifts in quiet hospital corridors, caring for people who will never know the full story of the hands that heal them. So I ask you, have you ever met someone like Margaret? Someone whose quiet competence hinted at a deeper story? Someone who seemed to carry invisible weight with invisible strength? Share their story in the comments. Let us know what city you're watching from. And remember to subscribe to The Lost Stories, because the most powerful stories are often the ones whispered in hallways, not shouted from stages. Until next time, if you ever find yourself in a hospital, look closely at the nurses who move with unusual precision, who bring calm to chaos, who seem to understand pain in ways that go beyond medical training. You might be in the presence of someone extraordinary, and you might never know unless you take the time to really see them.